In 1972, a Uruguayan flight crashed whilst journeying across the Andes, carrying 45 passengers, including 19 members of the Old Christians Rugby Club. Search attempts failed to spot the white plane wreckage in the deep snow of the site, and due to harsh weather conditions, attempts were called off until the thaw, when visibility would be better. In the wreckage, the survivors struggled to remain alive for a total of 72 days, resorting to having to make a very difficult choice in order to survive, that of eating the only possible food supply that was left, the bodies of those who didn't survive. This is a stunning tale of survival at all costs in harsh conditions, which has seen multiple adaptations over the years and various documentaries looking into it, including the 1993 US adaptation by Frank Marshall named Alive, which starred Ethan Hawke. This new telling of the story by J.A. Bayona, who gave us The Impossible in 2011, draws from the book by Pablo Vierci, which documented accounts of all 16 survivors of the experience, telling a more intimate tale of not only the physical trauma that the survivors went through, but also their spiritual and emotional side. This telling ensures that even if you've seen previous adaptations, you'll still find yourself drawn into this extremely powerful tale. Bayona makes some strong choices with camera and focus. He puts us right in the claustrophobic environment of those fighting to stay alive, trapped within the shell of the wreck of the plane, as they struggle to keep up their hope in the early days of the crash, and then as hunger and infection from injuries begin to set in, time passing and the situation becomes more and more desperate, the terrible decision they have to make. And that decision isn't played out lightly. The ethics and indeed the sinful aspects of what they must do. After all, the majority of the survivors were deeply religious, and it forms a strong central core to the midpoint of the film. In order to keep their bodies alive, they faced the damnation of their very souls. And as the days tick over, marked by updates on the screen, any losses of life are marked with names, respectfully honouring those whose lives were lost, and adding further weight into the impact of this genuinely horrific true story. Society of the Snow is a stunning and sometimes distressing look at survival in the harshest of conditions, and how the human will to survive will fight to overcome any and all obstacles, even at the risk of changing you internally forevermore. This is a harrowing but essential 144 minutes of viewing. Based on the true story of British humanitarian Nicholas Winton, who, on the eve of World War II breaking out, as the Nazis were occupying Czechoslovakia, dedicated his time to arrange for the transportation of as many of the children of the Jewish refugees as he could out of Prague and to safety before the German forces occupied the city itself. And this is quite a marvellous story of how a small group of individuals worked hard to help others fleeing terror, even though our own nation at the time was taking no action in the conflicts. Something which makes this tale feel very, very relevant to today's society. Winton never boasted about his efforts, and he never sought credit, but in the late 80s his story came to public attention via a usually satirical consumer affairs show that occasionally tapped into heartfelt tales, called That's Life on BBC. This film sees Anthony Hopkins play the elder Winton, who's sorting out his long accumulated hoard of notes and journals, and this leads to him reflecting back on his events of a younger man, where he's portrayed by Johnny Flynn, in those pre-war moments, leading to a recreation of one of the most iconic moments of BBC TV of all time. This is one of those biographical dramas that doesn't have time to detail the entire story, and indeed, being drawn from what little is known of Winton's life through his daughter's book, If It's Not Impossible. As mentioned, Winton never sought credit for his actions, and so only kept loose documentation within his scrapbook. This film plays his story viewpoint for emotional resonance, rather than delve too deeply into the lives of those he saved. But that's not an issue, as the manner in which it plays the tale, with scenes of Hopkins clearing out his home in preparation for the birth of a grandchild, allowing a story structure to flash back to see his activities, his manipulations, and his political manoeuvring alongside others, aiding the efforts to help refugees from a war that the government of the time didn't want to get involved in. In those pre-war set scenes, Flynn captures the essence of Hopkins's portrayal well, and it's worth noting that Winton's daughter herself suggested that Hopkins should be the person to play her father. And the flashbacks become believable because you believe that Flynn is an earlier Hopkins. And through Flynn's eyes, we see the desperate situation that those fleeing the encroaching forces are in. The film does shy away from being too visibly horrific, instead opting to highlight the plight and let the emotional impact carry the frightening and, for the children especially, confusing situation. By jumping back and forth in time, the film avoids becoming too dark as the moments set in the 80s work towards an ending that sees that famous episode of TV reenacted for an emotional gut punch that is sure to set some eyes watering. Now, I recall watching that episode of That's Life when it first aired. We used to watch it as a family at home each week, and I remember feeling the impact then at the age of 14 or 15. And over the years, it's one of those moments that has been highlighted in many of those TV Moments rundown shows that air quite frequently, usually on Channel 4 in the UK. Seeing it reenacted, especially with a heavyweight of acting such as Hopkins in the frame, certainly set me off again. Director James Hawes, who's known for mostly fantasy and sci-fi TV work on shows such as Merlin, Penny Dreadful, Black Mirror, and Snowpiercer, does some wonderful work in his first movie outing with marvellous period detail, beautiful framing, and creative editing choices to draw you into the tale. Packing out the cast with able support from Helena Bonham Carter as Babby Winton, Nicholas's mother who aids in the war efforts, and even a short role for Jonathan Pryce as a fellow humanitarian, Martin Blake, who Winton worked alongside in getting the refugees to safety. This is a film where all the cast complement the telling of a heartwarming life story, the message of which needs to be remembered to this very day.